Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Dominion, watching the blue-green planet rotate slowly beneath them. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he observed the primitive world through the ship's advanced sensors. This would be easy, he thought. Too easy. The planet designated as Terra by its inhabitants showed all the signs of a young, technologically backward civilization. Their ships barely managed to escape their own gravity well, and their larger space stations were crude constructions of metal and ceramic that wouldn't survive a single plasma burst from his smallest frigate. The intelligence reports confirmed what his sensors told him. This was a species that had barely discovered faster-than-light travel and had no significant defensive capabilities. "Commander Velfar," Kethvar called to his second-in-command, a sleek reptilian creature whose scales shimmered under the bridge's artificial lighting. "What is our fleet strength for this operation?" Velfar consulted his tactical display with practiced efficiency. 300 vessels, Admiral. 15 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, 90 destroyers, and 150 support craft. More than enough to pacify this primitive world within standard galactic hours. Kethvar nodded approvingly. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 43 star systems in the past decade alone, each victory adding to their growing reputation as the galaxy's newest military power. Their technology was superior, their tactics refined through countless battles, and their soldiers were bred for war from hatching. This human world would fall just like all the others. What made this conquest particularly satisfying was the strategic value of Terra's location. The planet sat at the intersection of 3 major hyperspace routes, making it a perfect staging ground for further expansion into what the humans called the local group. Once they controlled Terra, the entire sector would be open to Zephyrian dominance. "Admiral," interrupted Communications Officer Ithlos, his translator box converting his chittering language into standard galactic. "We are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. It appears to be urgent." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. The Galactic Council was a collection of old, weak species that had long ago forgotten the glory of conquest. They spent their time debating and negotiating instead of taking what they wanted by force. "Put it through, but make it brief. I have a planet to conquer." The main view screen shimmered and resolved into the image of Council Speaker Thisandra, an ancient member of the Altarian species, whose crystalline form pulsed with nervous energy. Her voice carried the weight of centuries when she spoke. "Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire, I am transmitting this message on behalf of the entire Galactic Council. You must cease your approach to the Terra system immediately. This is not a request, but a desperate warning from species who have witnessed the consequences of what you are about to attempt." Kethvar's laugh was a harsh sound that made several bridge crew members flinch. "Consequences? From these primitive humans? Speaker, your fear of such a backward species is beneath the dignity of the Council. These creatures have not even developed proper energy shielding for their vessels. You do not understand." Thisandra's form flickered with increasing agitation. "The humans are not primitive. They are something far more dangerous than any advanced technology. They are survivors from a death world, Admiral. A planet so hostile that every single organism on it has evolved to kill or be killed. The humans themselves are the apex predators of such a world." "Death world mythology," Kethvar dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. "Ancient superstitions used to frighten younglings. I have studied the planet's biosphere. Yes, it has some dangerous fauna, but nothing that poses a threat to modern military forces." The Council Speaker's crystalline structure darkened to deep blue, a sign of extreme distress among her people. "Admiral, I am transmitting the classified records of the Hegemony War, the Krylian Purges, and the Iron Moon Incident. Study them, learn from them. Understand what happens when humanity is threatened." Kethvar gestured for his intelligence officer to receive the transmission, though he had no intention of delaying his attack for ancient history lessons. "Your concern is noted, Speaker, but irrelevant. The Zephyrian Empire fears no enemy, regardless of their origin. These humans will submit or be destroyed, just like every other species that has stood against us. Then may the cosmic winds preserve whatever remains of your fleet, Admiral." "You have just made the greatest mistake in your empire's history." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Commander Velfar shifted uncomfortably in his command harness. "Admiral, perhaps we should examine these records before proceeding. The Council has never shown such concern for any of our previous campaigns." Kethvar's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you questioning my judgment, Commander? The Council speaks from weakness, not wisdom. Look at the planet below us. Their orbital defenses consist of primitive missile platforms and crude kinetic weapons. Their fleet is scattered across their system in penny packets, most of them exploration vessels retrofitted with basic armaments. He was correct in his assessment as far as it went. Humanity's space-based military forces were indeed limited compared to the Zephyrian war machine. Earth's orbital defense platforms mounted railguns and nuclear missile launchers, weapons that were laughably primitive by galactic standards. The human fleet consisted of fewer than 50 vessels of destroyer class or larger, most of them designed for exploration and scientific research rather than warfare. What Admiral Kethvar failed to understand, despite the Council's warning, was that humanity's true strength had never been their technology. It was something far more fundamental, something that couldn't be measured by sensor readings or tactical displays. "Begin the approach," Kethvar ordered. "Deploy the fleet in standard pacification formation. I want our dreadnoughts to begin orbital bombardment of their major cities. Once they see the futility of resistance, they will surrender their world to superior forces." As the Zephyrian fleet moved into attack position, automated systems on Earth detected the approaching threat. In command centers across the planet, alarms began to sound. Military leaders who had drilled for this possibility their entire careers suddenly found themselves facing the real thing. First contact with a hostile alien civilization. General Sarah Chen stood in the Pentagon Situation Room, watching as tactical displays showed the approaching alien fleet. 300 vessels, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. The numbers were overwhelming, the technology gap insurmountable. By any rational analysis, Earth was about to fall to an enemy they could not hope to defeat. But General Chen had not risen to her position through rational thinking alone. She had studied military history, had learned the lessons taught by every human conflict from ancient tribal warfare to the recent conflicts that had unified Earth under a single planetary government. She knew that superior technology and numbers were not always enough to guarantee victory. "Get me President Martinez," she ordered, "and send a priority transmission to every human settlement in the system. It's time to implement the Soul Defense Protocol." The Soul Defense Protocol was humanity's contingency plan for exactly this scenario: invasion by a technologically superior alien force. It was a plan that had been developed by military strategists who understood that humanity's greatest advantage was not their weapons or their ships, but their willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. Across the solar system, the protocol's implementation began immediately. On Mars, the mining colonies received their orders and began converting their industrial equipment for military purposes. The asteroid belt miners, accustomed to working in the most dangerous environment imaginable, started preparing their ships for combat roles they had never been designed to fill. Even the research stations on Jupiter's moons began following protocols that transformed peaceful scientists into desperate defenders. Admiral Kethvar watched these preparations with amusement. The humans were scrambling like insects when their nest is disturbed, but their efforts would be futile. His sensors showed mining ships approaching his fleet's position, clearly intending to engage his dreadnoughts in combat. The very idea was absurd. These civilian vessels, designed for asteroid excavation and cargo hauling, stood no chance against purpose-built warships. "Weapons Officer Zarketh," Kethvar commanded, "disable those approaching vessels. Use minimum force. I want the humans to understand that resistance is pointless, not that we are barbaric." The weapons officer, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, targeted the lead human vessel with a low-power plasma burst designed to disable rather than destroy. The beam struck the modified cargo hauler directly, and for a moment, it seemed as though the ship would be knocked out of the fight as expected. Then something happened that would be remembered in Zephyrian military academies for generations to come, assuming any Zephyrian survived to remember it. The human ship exploded. Not the controlled detonation of a vessel whose reactor had been damaged, but a massive, brilliant explosion that sent debris flying in all directions and generated an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily blinded the Zephyrian sensors. When the static cleared, Kethvar stared in disbelief at the tactical display. "Weapons officer report. What happened to that vessel?" Zarketh's voice trembled as he consulted his instruments. "Admiral, the ship appears to have been carrying a massive explosive payload. Our plasma burst triggered a detonation equivalent to approximately 50 fusion warheads." "Impossible!" No cargo vessel could carry such a payload and still maintain structural integrity. But even as Kethvar spoke, the remaining human vessels were closing on his fleet, and his sensors were detecting similar energy signatures from each of them. The horrible truth was beginning to dawn on him. The humans had converted their cargo ships into massive suicide bombs. This was not how civilized species conducted warfare. Throughout the galaxy, military conflicts followed established patterns. Battles were fought between proper warships using advanced targeting systems and energy shields. Civilian vessels stayed clear of combat zones, and non-combatants were generally protected under various galactic conventions. The humans, however, had never been party to those conventions. They had developed their military doctrine in isolation, learning from their own brutal history of warfare where victory went to those willing to make any sacrifice necessary. The concept of suicide attacks was not new to them. It was a tactical option that had been used throughout their history when facing overwhelming odds. As the first wave of human suicide ships reached the Zephyrian fleet, Admiral Kethvar finally began to understand what the council speaker had tried to tell him. These humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They were fighting like cornered predators who would rather die taking their enemies with them than submit to conquest. The bridge of the Stellar Dominion shook as one of the human vessels managed to detonate close enough to overwhelm the dreadnought's shields. Alarms sounded as secondary explosions rippled through the fleet, and Kethvar realized that his supposedly overwhelming technological advantage was being neutralized by an enemy willing to die to achieve victory. "All ships, maintain formation and continue bombardment," he ordered, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. These are desperate tactics that cannot be sustained. But even as he spoke, reports were coming in from across the solar system of similar human actions. Every settlement, every outpost, every research station was responding to the invasion not with surrender, but with defiance. The humans were preparing to fight for their world with everything they had, and they clearly had no intention of making it easy for their conquerors. Admiral Kethvar was about to learn the first and most important lesson about humanity. They had not become the dominant species on a death world by being reasonable or civilized. They had earned that position by being absolutely ruthless when their survival was threatened. The war for Earth had begun, and neither side yet understood the true cost of the conflict that would reshape the galaxy. The first 24 hours of what historians would later call the Terror War established patterns that would define the entire conflict. Admiral Kethvar had expected a swift victory followed by the typical surrender negotiations that marked the conquest of civilized worlds. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy that seemed to view the concept of surrender as a form of mental illness. The orbital bombardment of Earth's major cities had begun according to standard Zephyrian doctrine. Precise plasma strikes were meant to destroy military installations and government centers while leaving infrastructure intact for future use. The Admiral watched from his command deck as brilliant flashes of energy struck targets across the planet's surface, each blast carefully calculated to demonstrate overwhelming force while minimizing economic damage to his future conquest. What he witnessed instead defied every principle of civilized warfare he had ever learned. Commander Velthar approached the Admiral's position with a datapad clutched in his clawed hands, his reptilian features showing confusion and growing concern. "Admiral, we are receiving unusual reports from the planetary bombardment." "Unusual how?" Kethvar demanded, his four eyes fixed on the tactical displays that showed successful strikes against primary targets. "The humans are not responding to our attacks as expected. Intelligence Officer Mordak has intercepted their communications, and the translations are disturbing." Kethvar gestured impatiently for the report. As he read the translated human communications, his mandibles began to click rapidly, a sign of deep agitation among his species. The intercepted messages painted a picture of a response unlike anything in galactic military experience. Rather than panic or surrender negotiations, the human communications showed a coordinated transformation of their entire civilian population into military assets. Factories that had produced consumer goods were retooling to manufacture weapons. Research laboratories were abandoning peaceful projects to develop new methods of killing. Even schools were being converted into training centers for guerrilla warfare. Most disturbing of all were the personal communications between humans. Where other species would send messages of farewell and despair in the face of certain defeat, the humans were sharing tactical information, weapon designs, and what could only be described as encouragement for more effective methods of killing their invaders. "Sir," Intelligence Officer Mordak reported from his station, "we are detecting massive industrial conversion across the planet. The humans appear to be transforming their entire economy into a war machine within hours of our arrival." This was impossible according to everything the Zephyrians knew about planetary conquest. Advanced civilizations required months or years to convert from civilian to military production. The process involved complex logistics, resource allocation, and technological adaptation that simply could not be accomplished in such a short time frame. What the Zephyrians failed to understand was that humanity's industrial base had been designed from the beginning with conversion capability in mind. The lessons of Earth's global wars had taught human leaders that the ability to rapidly transform civilian production into military manufacturing was often the difference between victory and defeat. Every major factory on Earth had contingency plans for military conversion that could be implemented within hours of activation. More importantly, the humans had something that no other galactic species possessed: a population that had been raised on stories of resistance against impossible odds. Human culture was filled with tales of heroes who had faced overwhelming enemies and found ways to win through determination, sacrifice, and sheer bloody-mindedness. These were not just entertainment, they were cultural programming that had prepared the entire species for exactly this scenario. "Admiral," Communications Officer Ithlos announced, "we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It appears to be from their military leadership." The main screen activated to show a middle-aged human woman in military uniform standing in what appeared to be an underground command center. General Sarah Chen looked directly into the camera with an expression that made several Zephyrian officers step back instinctively. "I am General Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," she began, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had already accepted death and moved beyond it. "You have attacked our world without provocation and killed innocent civilians. This act of aggression will not be tolerated or forgotten." Admiral Kethvar activated his own transmitter, intending to offer the standard surrender terms that usually ended conflicts at this point. "General Chen, I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Your world is now under Imperial control. Cease all resistance and prepare for occupation. Your compliance will ensure the survival of your population." General Chen's response was not what he expected. She laughed. It was not the hysterical laughter of someone who had broken under stress, but the cold, calculating amusement of a predator that had just realized its prey had walked into a trap. When she spoke again, her words would be transmitted across the galaxy and studied by xenobiologists for centuries to come. "Admiral, you have made two critical errors in your assessment of humanity. First, you assumed that our primitive technology made us weak. Second, you assumed that we would choose survival over freedom. You are about to learn why both assumptions are fatal mistakes." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in uncomfortable silence. Admiral Kethvar felt a strange sensation in his digestive system, something he would later recognize as the first stirring of genuine fear. Within hours of General Chen's transmission, the Zephyrian fleet began to experience the reality of warfare against a death-world species. The human suicide attacks had been just the beginning. Now, as the aliens attempted to establish orbital control, they encountered defensive tactics that violated every principle of civilized combat. The humans had seeded their orbital space with debris clouds that contained dormant kinetic weapons. When Zephyrian ships approached, these seemingly inert pieces of space junk would activate, revealing themselves as guided projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The aliens' energy shields, designed to stop plasma bolts and particle beams, offered little protection against solid objects traveling at relativistic velocities. Even more disturbing was the humans' use of their own infrastructure as weapons. Earth's orbital manufacturing platforms, instead of shutting down in the face of the invasion, had begun producing what could only be described as orbital mines. These devices were too primitive to threaten modern warships under normal circumstances, but the humans were not using them under normal circumstances. They were ramming them into Zephyrian vessels at maximum acceleration. Each orbital platform represented millions of tons of industrial machinery accelerated to destructive velocity. When they impacted Zephyrian shields, the results were catastrophic. The aliens' defensive systems could absorb enormous amounts of directed energy, but they were not designed to stop the equivalent of a small asteroid moving at combat speeds. "Damage report," Kethvar demanded, as the Stellar Dominion shuddered under the impact of another human kamikaze attack. "Shields at 60%, Admiral," reported his defensive systems officer. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. We have lost 3 plasma cannon batteries and our secondary sensor array." Similar reports were coming in from across the fleet. The humans' willingness to sacrifice their own infrastructure was causing damage that straightforward military action could never have achieved. Worse, every attack seemed designed not just to inflict immediate damage, but to make the Zephyrians' position increasingly untenable. Commander Velthar approached with another troubling report. "Admiral, our ground assault shuttles are reporting difficulties with their landing operations." This was a significant understatement. The Zephyrian ground forces had encountered resistance that defied all rational military analysis. Instead of defending strategic locations with conventional fortifications, the humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon. The first landing parties had touched down, expecting to face organized military units that they could defeat through superior firepower and tactics. Instead, they found themselves under attack by everything from children throwing improvised explosives to elderly civilians operating weapons systems built from farming equipment and industrial machinery. The humans had demonstrated an ability to create lethal weapons from virtually anything available in their environment. Kitchen utensils became blades, cleaning chemicals became explosives, and electronic devices became improvised guidance systems for projectile weapons. Even more disturbing was the humans' apparent immunity to the psychological warfare that typically broke the will of defending populations. Zephyrian military doctrine relied heavily on demonstrating overwhelming force to convince enemy civilians that resistance was futile. This approach had worked on 43 previous worlds, where rational populations had calculated the cost of continued fighting and chosen surrender over destruction. The humans, however, seemed to view the aliens' superior technology as a challenge rather than a deterrent. Instead of being demoralized by their enemies' advantages, they were inspired to find creative ways to overcome them. Reports from the ground forces described human civilians studying destroyed Zephyrian equipment, learning how it worked, and then developing countermeasures using primitive but effective technology. "Admiral," Intelligence Officer Mordak called out, his voice tight with strain, "I am receiving reports from across the planet that suggest the humans are engaging in systematic analysis of our technology. They appear to be reverse engineering our equipment faster than any species we have encountered." This was the moment when Admiral Kethvar began to understand the true nature of his enemy. The humans were not just primitive savages defending their territory through brute force and desperation. They were highly intelligent predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to overcome stronger, faster, and better armed opponents through adaptation and innovation. On their death world, humans had not survived by being the strongest or the fastest. They had survived by being the most adaptable, the most persistent, and the most creative problem solvers in their planet's ecosystem. Now, faced with technology centuries ahead of their own, they were applying those same survival skills to military engineering. The reports flooding in from the planetary surface painted a picture of systematic technological absorption that bordered on the impossible. Human engineers were studying captured Zephyrian equipment and producing functional copies using primitive manufacturing techniques within hours of first contact. Their scientists were analyzing alien energy weapons and developing defensive measures using materials available in any hardware store. Most disturbing of all, the humans were sharing this information through communication networks that seemed to operate independently of any infrastructure the Zephyrians could target. The entire human population was functioning as a single coordinated intelligence gathering and technology development organism. "Sir," Commander Velfar reported, his voice betraying growing concern, "our casualties are mounting at an unacceptable rate. We have lost 12% of our ground forces in the first day of operations, and our fleet has sustained damage equivalent to a major fleet engagement." Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The numbers told a story that contradicted everything he knew about military science. His technologically superior force was being systematically degraded by an enemy that should have been defeated within hours of first contact. "Open a channel to Imperial Command," he ordered. "I need to make a report to the High Council." As he composed his message to his superiors, Admiral Kethvar realized that he would have to explain something that had never happened in Zephyrian military history: how a primitive species was not only resisting conquest, but actually inflicting significant casualties on the Empire's finest fleet. What he did not yet understand was that the humans were just getting started. The first day of the Terror War had been humanity's learning phase, a time for them to study their enemies and develop countermeasures. The real fighting was about to begin, and it would teach the galaxy a lesson about the dangers of underestimating a death-world species that had spent millions of years learning to kill anything that threatened their survival. The Zephyrian Empire had declared war on humanity, expecting easy victory. Instead, they had awakened a predator that would not stop hunting until every alien ship was destroyed or driven from human space. The deadliest species in the galaxy was about to demonstrate why they deserved that title. 3 weeks into the Terror War, Admiral Kethvar stood before a tactical display that showed the impossible. His fleet, which had begun the campaign with 300 vessels, now numbered barely 200 functional ships. The humans, who should have been conquered within days, had not only repelled his invasion, but were actively hunting his forces throughout the solar system. The transformation of humanity's response had been gradual, but inexorable. What had begun as desperate defensive measures had evolved into coordinated offensive operations that demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that military analysts across the galaxy would study for centuries. The humans had learned to fight a three-dimensional war in space, with equipment designed for mining asteroids and exploring distant worlds. Commander Velfar approached the Admiral's station with the daily casualty report, his reptilian features showing the stress of constant combat. "Admiral, we lost another cruiser in the asteroid belt engagement. The Void's Edge was destroyed with all hands when human miners detonated a modified cargo vessel filled with refined uranium. The loss of the Void's Edge represented more than just another tactical defeat. It demonstrated how completely the humans had adapted to three-dimensional warfare in their own solar system. The asteroid belt had become a maze of hidden bases, improvised weapons platforms, and mobile strike forces that appeared without warning to attack and then vanished back into the millions of space rocks that provided perfect camouflage. Human miners, accustomed to working in the most dangerous environment imaginable, had proven to be natural space guerrillas. They knew every asteroid, every gravitational anomaly, and every hiding place in their territory. More importantly, they had spent generations developing equipment and techniques for moving massive objects in zero gravity, skills that translated perfectly to military applications. What was the tactical situation? Kethvar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The same as always, sir." The humans appeared from 3 different directions simultaneously, using asteroids as cover until the last possible moment. By the time our sensors detected them, they were already too close for our main weapons to track effectively. The Void's Edge managed to destroy 2 of the attacking vessels before the third detonated against our shields. This pattern had become frustratingly familiar. The humans had learned that they could not match Zephyrian technology in direct confrontation, so they had stopped trying. Instead, they had developed tactics that used their superior knowledge of local space and their willingness to accept casualties that would be unthinkable for any civilized species. Every human attack was a suicide mission by galactic standards. They flew obsolete ships into combat against superior forces, used weapons cobbled together from industrial equipment, and accepted losses that would have broken the morale of any other species. But somehow, these seemingly hopeless attacks were achieving strategic results that conventional military wisdom said should be impossible. "Intelligence Officer Mordak," Kefar called, "what is the current assessment of human industrial capacity?" The intelligence officer's mandibles clicked nervously as he consulted his displays. "Sir, we are detecting increasing production of what appear to be military systems across all human settlements. Their manufacturing output has increased by 300% since the beginning of our operation. This was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of humanity's response to the invasion. Instead of having their industrial capacity degraded by the fighting, the humans seemed to be growing stronger with each passing day. Every destroyed facility was rebuilt within days, usually with improved defensive measures and greater production capacity. The humans had demonstrated an ability to construct functional military equipment using techniques that Zephyrian engineers would have dismissed as impossible. They built weapons from scavenged materials, manufactured ammunition using chemistry that should not have worked, and created vehicles that violated several fundamental principles of physics but somehow remained operational. More troubling was the way human civilian population had integrated into their military effort. There were no non-combatants in the human system. Children too young for direct combat served as intelligence gatherers and saboteurs. Elderly humans too frail for fighting designed weapons and manufactured explosives. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock developing new methods of killing aliens, sharing their discoveries through networks that seemed to operate independently of any infrastructure the Zephyrians could target. "Sir," Communications Officer Ithlos announced, "we are receiving another transmission from the human military leadership." Admiral Kethvar had come to dread these communications. The human leaders had developed a disturbing habit of providing tactical analysis that was both accurate and deeply unsettling. They seemed to understand Zephyrian military doctrine better than many Imperial officers, and they used this knowledge to predict and counter alien strategies with devastating effectiveness. The main screen activated to show General Chen in what appeared to be a new command center, this one clearly built into natural rock formations that would be nearly impossible to detect or target from orbit. She looked exactly as composed as she had 3 weeks earlier, despite the fact that her planet was under active invasion. "Admiral Kethvar," she began without preamble, "our analysis indicates that your fleet has suffered approximately 33% casualties since the beginning of your attack. Your ground forces have been unable to secure any strategic objectives, and your supply lines are under constant harassment by our forces." Kethvar activated his own transmitter, intending to project strength despite his deteriorating tactical position. "General Chen, your resistance has been noted. but it cannot continue indefinitely. Your losses have been severe, and your industrial capacity is limited. General Chen's smile was the expression of a predator that had cornered its prey. Admiral, I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this conflict. You seem to believe that you are conducting a military operation to conquer our world. That is incorrect. You are currently being hunted by the apex predator species of a Class 12 death world. The fact that you have survived this long is a testament to your military technology, but your survival time is rapidly decreasing. The transmission continued with a detailed analysis of Zephyrian tactical weaknesses that demonstrated an understanding of Imperial military doctrine that should have been impossible for a species that had never encountered galactic civilization. General Chen discussed fleet formations, weapon capabilities, and strategic objectives with the expertise of someone who had studied Zephyrian methods for years rather than weeks. Your military operates under the assumption that technological superiority guarantees victory, she explained. This assumption is valid when fighting other civilized species that share your concepts of acceptable casualties and strategic objectives. However, you are not fighting a civilized species. You are fighting humans. The general gestured to a display that showed tactical information the humans should not have possessed. We have analyzed your attack patterns, studied your equipment, and identified the psychological limitations that constrain your tactical options. Your soldiers are trained to fight according to established protocols that assume certain rules of engagement. Our soldiers are trained to kill the enemy by any means necessary. As if to emphasize her point, the tactical display showed real-time footage of human resistance operations across Earth and throughout the solar system. Zephyrian viewers watched in fascinated horror as human defenders used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Children operated weapon systems built into school buildings that had been converted into fortresses. Elderly humans piloted mining vehicles that had been transformed into mobile weapons platforms. Scientists conducted live-fire experiments using captured alien equipment, testing new weapon designs on Zephyrian prisoners with the dispassionate efficiency of laboratory researchers. Your empire's previous conquests succeeded because you fought species that valued survival over freedom, General Chen continued. We are not such a species. We have made the collective decision that death is preferable to slavery. This decision changes the tactical calculations of this conflict in ways that your military doctrine cannot accommodate. The transmission ended with coordinates for what the general described as the location where you can surrender your remaining forces to minimize further casualties. The audacity of the suggestion left the Zephyrian command crew speechless. Admiral, Commander Velthar said quietly, perhaps we should consider the general's analysis. Our casualties are mounting, and the humans show no sign of weakening resistance. Before Kethvar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The tactical display showed new contacts approaching the fleet's position, but these were unlike any human vessels they had previously encountered. Sensor analysis, Kethvar demanded. Sir, the sensor officer reported with barely controlled panic. We are detecting 12 large vessels approaching from the outer system. They appear to be modified asteroids. The truth was worse than the initial assessment suggested. The humans had not simply modified asteroids, they had converted them into massive kinetic weapons accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. Each one represented millions of tons of rock and metal, moving at velocities that would make their impact equivalent to planetary bombardment weapons. Evasive maneuvers, Kethvar ordered, but he already knew it was too late. The human weapons were already too close and moving too fast for his ships to avoid. The first asteroid weapon struck the dreadnought Eternal Conquest amidships, passing through the vessel's shields and armor as if they were transparent. The ship simply disintegrated, its debris field spreading across several thousand kilometers of space in seconds. As more asteroid weapons found their targets, Admiral Kethvar finally understood what General Chen had been trying to explain. The humans were not fighting a war of conquest or territorial defense. They were conducting a systematic extermination of everything that threatened their species' survival. This was not military strategy. It was predatory behavior on a cosmic scale. Emergency transmission to Imperial Command, Kethvar ordered as his fleet began to disintegrate around him. Priority Alpha. The Terra operation has encountered unprecedented resistance. Request immediate reinforcement with full battle fleet. What Admiral Kethvar did not understand was that his request for reinforcements would soon lead to the largest military disaster in galactic history. The Zephyrian Empire was about to make the same mistake that had doomed their first expedition. They were going to send more ships into the hunting ground of the galaxy's most efficient killers. The humans had spent 3 weeks learning how to destroy advanced alien technology, using primitive equipment and innovative tactics. Now they were about to get the opportunity to test their methods against an even larger force, with predictable results. The Terror War was entering its second phase, and humanity was ready to demonstrate why no civilization in galactic history had ever successfully conquered a death world whose inhabitants had learned to fight back. High Admiral Zekthara of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy stood in the war room of the Empire's greatest dreadnought, the Universal Dominion, studying holographic displays that showed the remnants of Admiral Kethvar's fleet limping back toward Imperial space. The reports from the Terra system were almost impossible to believe, describing casualties and tactical defeats that contradicted everything known about military science. 78 ships had escaped the human system out of the original 300. The survivors carried stories of an enemy that fought with methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare, using tactics that ranged from brilliant to completely insane. Most disturbing of all were the reports of human technical development that suggested the primitive species had advanced their military technology by centuries in mere weeks. Fleet Admiral reported Intelligence Coordinator Velnoth, her crystalline structure flickering with nervous energy. We have completed analysis of the sensor data and survivor testimonies from the Terra operation. The results are unprecedented in Imperial military history. High Admiral Zekthara was a veteran of the Empire's greatest military campaigns, having personally led the conquests that brought 17 star systems under Imperial control. His strategic genius was legendary throughout Zephyrian space, and his tactical innovations were taught in every military academy. If anyone could solve the human problem, it was him. Present your analysis, he commanded, his four eyes focusing intently on the intelligence coordinator. The humans demonstrate capabilities that should be impossible for their level of technological development. Velnoth began, her translated voice carrying undertones of confusion. They have created functional weapon systems using manufacturing techniques that our engineers describe as crude but effective. Their tactical coordination suggests a level of military sophistication that rivals our own, despite having no previous experience with galactic warfare. The holographic displays showed reconstructed battle sequences from the Terra system, each one demonstrating human innovations that defied rational explanation. Converted cargo ships had engaged Imperial dreadnoughts in combat and emerged victorious through tactics that sacrificed efficiency for devastating psychological impact. Civilian miners had operated weapon systems cobbled together from industrial equipment and achieved targeting accuracy that matched military-grade systems. Most significantly, Velnoth continued, the humans have demonstrated an ability to reverse engineer Imperial technology at a rate that suggests either brilliant scientific minds or some form of technological telepathy. We have verified reports of human forces deploying energy weapons based on captured Imperial equipment within days of first contact. This was the detail that most concerned High Admiral Zekthara. Advanced civilizations throughout the galaxy required years or decades to understand and replicate technology from other species. The idea that a primitive species could analyze and reproduce advanced military systems in days or weeks suggested capabilities that fundamentally challenged Imperial assumptions about technological development. What is the assessment of human population and industrial capacity? Zekthara asked. Approximately 8 billion individuals across multiple worlds and space habitats, the intelligence coordinator replied. Industrial capacity is primitive but highly adaptable. Most significant is their apparent ability to convert civilian infrastructure to military production within hours of receiving new specifications. The High Admiral studied the tactical projections with growing concern. The human solar system contained not just Earth, but multiple colonies on other worlds and hundreds of space habitats throughout their asteroid belt. Each of these settlements had demonstrated the same fanatical resistance and innovative tactics that had destroyed Admiral Kethvar's fleet. Worse, intercepted human communications suggested that their species had used the 3-week conflict as a learning experience. They had studied Imperial technology, analyzed Zephyrian tactics, and developed countermeasures that were already being distributed to every human settlement in the galaxy. The humans were not just defending their homeworld, they were preparing for a larger conflict. Fleet Admiral, announced Communications Officer Tarwelsh. We are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They are requesting immediate audience with Imperial Command regarding the Terra situation. Zekthara authorized the transmission, expecting another futile plea for diplomatic resolution. Instead, he found himself facing an emergency session of the Council's senior leadership, including representatives from species that rarely involve themselves in galactic politics. Council Speaker Thisandra appeared on the main display, her crystalline form showing the deep blue coloration that indicated extreme distress. Behind her were visible the representatives of over 40 different species, many of whom Zekthara had never seen participate in council proceedings. High Admiral Zekthara, the speaker began, the Galactic Council is convening an emergency session to address the crisis that your empire has created in the Terra system. We must speak with utmost urgency about the consequences of your actions. The Empire's internal military operations are not subject to Council oversight, Zekthara replied, with the arrogance that had made his species feared throughout their region of the galaxy. You do not understand, interrupted a new voice. Elder Krondar of the ancient ethereal conclave materialized in the transmission, his energy form flickering with patterns that indicated profound concern. The ethereals were among the oldest species in the galaxy, having achieved spaceflight when most civilizations were still discovering fire. For them to participate directly in council proceedings was unprecedented. High Admiral, Elder Krondar continued, your species has made the greatest strategic error in galactic history. You have attacked a Deathworld species and taught them that galactic civilization poses a threat to their survival. The consequences of this action will reshape the balance of power throughout known space. Zekthara's mandibles clicked with irritation. These ancient fears of Deathworld species are mythology used to frighten primitive civilizations. The humans have demonstrated some tactical innovation, but they remain a primitive species with limited technological capabilities. The Elder's response was a sound that the translation systems could not properly convert, but which somehow conveyed millennia of accumulated wisdom and desperate concern. High Admiral, there are certain truths that advanced civilizations learn only through catastrophic experience. One of these truths is that technological superiority means nothing when facing a species that has evolved on a world where everything is trying to kill everything else. The humans are not just another galactic civilization, added Dr. Yithmarin of the Scientific Concord, her tentacles writhing with agitation. They are the product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that selected for intelligence, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. They are what happens when a species becomes too dangerous for its own planet to contain. The council representatives took turns presenting evidence that painted a picture of humanity that contradicted every imperial assessment. The humans were not primitive. They were deliberately understated in their technological development, focusing on adaptability rather than advancement. They were not peaceful. They were a species that had spent their entire history perfecting the art of warfare and had only recently achieved planetary unity through superior military technique. Most disturbing of all, the humans were not isolated. Intelligence reports showed that they had been quietly establishing settlements throughout their region of the galaxy for decades, creating a network of colonies that were all now receiving the tactical innovations developed during the Terra conflict. High Admiral, Council Speaker Thisandra said with the gravity of someone delivering a death sentence. We must inform you that 17 member species have already declared their territories neutral in any conflict involving humanity. They will not permit Imperial forces to transit their space or use their facilities for military operations against the Terra system. This was a diplomatic catastrophe of unprecedented magnitude. Galactic civilization operated under the assumption that all disputes could be resolved through superior technology and overwhelming force. The idea that multiple species would voluntarily abandon neutrality to protect a species they had never encountered suggested a level of fear that Zekthara had never witnessed.
Furthermore, the speaker continued, we have received communications from the humans themselves.
They have requested permission to address the full Galactic Council regarding what they describe as an unprovoked act of aggression against a peaceful species. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command deck of the Universal Dominion in stunned silence. High Admiral Zekthara realized that his empire had not just attacked a primitive world. They had triggered a galactic crisis that threatened to isolate the Zephyrians from the entire interstellar community. Fleet Admiral, reported his tactical coordinator, we have received new intelligence from our monitoring stations. The humans are broadcasting tactical information across their entire communications network. They appear to be sharing weapons designs, defensive strategies, and detailed analysis of our technology with all of their settlements. This was the moment when Zekthara began to understand the true scope of the disaster his empire faced. The humans were not just defending their homeworld. They were preparing every human settlement in the galaxy for potential conflict with Zephyrian forces. They had transformed the Terra War from a local conquest operation into a galaxy-wide military crisis. Assemble the Grand Fleet, he ordered. Every available vessel, every alliance partner, every military asset the Empire can deploy. If the humans want to fight the Empire, we will give them a war they cannot survive. What High Admiral Zekthara failed to understand was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario since the moment the first Zephyrian ship had entered their system. They had used the 3-week conflict not just to learn how to fight galactic technology, but to prepare for the larger war that they knew would follow. The grand fleet that the Zephyrian Empire was assembling represented the largest military force in their history, over 2,000 vessels supported by alliance partners and mercenary fleets. It was a force designed to end the human threat permanently, through overwhelming technological superiority and coordinated tactics that no primitive species could hope to counter. The humans, however, were no longer the primitive species that the Zephyrians had first encountered. 3 weeks of warfare had taught them lessons about galactic technology, military tactics, and their own capabilities that would have taken most species centuries to learn. They had evolved from desperate defenders into efficient killers, and they were about to demonstrate why the galaxy's greatest mistake was giving them time to prepare. The Terror War was about to enter its final phase, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what happened when you declared war on the deadliest species in known space. The Zephyrian Grand Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Terra system in perfect formation. 2,300 vessels arranged in the most magnificent display of military power the galaxy had ever witnessed. High Admiral Zekthara stood on the command deck of the Universal Dominion, surveying his armada with satisfaction. This was not just a military force, it was a statement of imperial supremacy that would end the human resistance and demonstrate to the galaxy that challenging Zephyrian power was futile. The fleet included not only the Empire's finest warships, but also vessels from dozen allied species who had joined the campaign to share in the glory of defeating the upstart humans. Mercenary fleets added their firepower to the massive force, creating an alliance that represented a significant portion of the galaxy's total military capacity. Fleet composition report, Zekthara commanded as his ships moved into attack formation. 200 dreadnoughts, 400 cruisers, 800 destroyers, and 900 support vessels, reported Fleet Coordinator Yithmalik. Total crew complement exceeds 2 million personnel from 15 different species. This is the largest military operation in galactic history. The High Admiral nodded with satisfaction. The humans had demonstrated impressive tactical innovation during their first encounter with Imperial forces, but they could not possibly have prepared for an assault of this magnitude. No species in galactic history had survived contact with a force 1/10 this size. Begin sensor sweeps of the system, he ordered. I want complete tactical data on human defensive positions before we commence the final assault. What the sensors revealed defied every expectation the Zephyrians had developed about human capabilities. The Terra system had been transformed from a collection of primitive settlements into what could only be described as a fortress designed by minds that understood three-dimensional warfare better than species that had been fighting in space for millennia. The asteroid belt had become a maze of interconnected defensive positions, each one designed to support the others in overlapping fields of fire. The human colonies on Mars and the outer planets were no longer isolated settlements but nodes in a communication network that allowed real-time coordination across the entire system. Most disturbing of all, every piece of space debris larger than a combat shuttle had been converted into either a weapons platform or a kinetic projectile. Intelligence assessment, Zekthara demanded, studying the tactical displays with growing unease. Sir, Intelligence Coordinator Velnoth reported. The humans appeared to have converted their entire solar system into a single integrated weapons system. We are detecting energy signatures that suggest they have developed functional replicas of our plasma cannon technology using primitive manufacturing techniques. This was impossible, according to everything the Empire knew about technological development, but the sensor data was undeniable. The humans had not only reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology, but had improved upon it using design principles that Imperial engineers had never considered. Fleet Admiral, Communications Officer Tar Welsh announced, "We are receiving a transmission from the Human Military Command." The main screen activated to show General Chen standing in what appeared to be a command center carved from solid asteroid rock. Behind her were visible dozens of human officers, each one displaying the calm confidence of professionals who had spent months preparing for this moment. High Admiral Zekthara, she began without preamble, we have monitored your fleet's approach and analyzed its composition. 2,300 vessels, multiple species alliance, total crew complement estimated at 2.1 million sentient beings. This represents approximately 60% of the total military capacity of your alliance network. The accuracy of her intelligence assessment sent ripples of concern through the Zephyrian command staff. The humans should not have possessed information about Imperial fleet strengths or alliance capabilities, yet they were displaying detailed knowledge of military assets that were supposed to be classified at the highest levels. You have assembled this force to accomplish what you believe will be the final destruction of human civilization, General Chen continued. This assessment is incorrect. You have assembled this force to provide humanity with the largest field test in history of our new military capabilities. High Admiral Zekthara activated his own transmitter, intending to demonstrate the hopelessness of the human position. General Chen, you are facing the combined military might of 15 galactic civilizations. Your primitive weapons and improvised tactics cannot prevail against such overwhelming force. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to survive under Imperial administration. General Chen's response was a smile that contained no warmth or humor, only the predatory satisfaction of a hunter that had successfully lured its prey into the perfect killing ground. High Admiral, you have made the same error in assessment that led to your first expedition's destruction. You continue to analyze this conflict using the strategic assumptions that govern warfare between civilized species. We are not a civilized species. We are the evolutionary product of a death world that spent 4 billion years teaching its inhabitants to kill anything that threatened their survival. She gestured to displays that showed tactical information the humans should not have possessed. Your fleet is operating under several critical misconceptions. First, you assume that our defensive positions are fixed installations that can be overwhelmed through superior firepower. Second, you assume that our weapon systems are limited to the primitive technology you observed during your first encounter. Third, you assume that we will fight according to the conventional tactics that govern galactic warfare. As if responding to her words, the space around the Zephyrian fleet suddenly erupted with activity. What had appeared to be empty space revealed itself to contain thousands of concealed human vessels, each one designed to be invisible to conventional sensors until the moment of attack. All ships, battle stations, Zekthara commanded, as his fleet found itself surrounded by an enemy force that had appeared from nowhere. How did they achieve such complete sensor masking? The answer came in the form of devastating attacks that demonstrated how completely humanity had revolutionized the nature of space combat. Human ships appeared and disappeared like phantoms, using stealth technology that rendered them effectively invisible until they were close enough to inflict maximum damage. Their weapon systems fired projectiles that moved at relativistic velocities, making them impossible to intercept with conventional point defense systems. Most terrifying of all was the coordination of the human attacks. Every vessel in their fleet operated as part of a single, unified intelligence that anticipated Zephyrian tactics and countered them before they could be fully implemented. It was as if the humans were fighting with complete knowledge of Imperial battle plans and strategic doctrine. Damage report, Zekthara demanded, as the Universal Dominion shuddered under impacts from weapons that should not have existed. Multiple hull breaches across all decks, reported the damage control officer. We have lost primary shields and 40% of our weapon systems. The humans are using some form of armor-penetrating projectile that bypasses our defensive systems entirely. Similar reports were flooding in from across the Grand Fleet. Ships that had never suffered significant damage in dozens of previous campaigns were being systematically destroyed by weapons that violated every principle of advanced military technology. The humans were killing Imperial dreadnoughts using equipment that appeared to be constructed from scavenged materials and industrial machinery. Fleet Admiral, his tactical coordinator announced with barely controlled panic, we have lost over 300 vessels in the first engagement phase. The humans are inflicting casualties at a rate that exceeds our worst-case projections by orders of magnitude. This was the moment when High Admiral Zekthara finally understood what the Galactic Council had been trying to warn him about. The humans were not fighting a conventional military engagement. They were conducting a systematic extermination of everything that threatened their species. Every tactic, every weapon, every strategic decision was designed not to win a battle, but to ensure that no Zephyrian ship survived to threaten human space again. Emergency transmission to all Imperial territories, he ordered. Priority Alpha. The Grand Fleet is under attack by forces exceeding all intelligence projections. Humanity represents a threat to galactic civilization that requires immediate, coordinated response from all allied species. But even as he spoke, Zekthara knew that no help would come. The humans had spent months since the first encounter, preparing not just for this battle, but for the larger conflict that would follow. They had demonstrated capabilities that would terrify every species in the galaxy, and had shown that they possessed both the tactical sophistication and the ruthless determination necessary to defeat any force sent against them. General Chen's voice echoed through the communications system of every surviving Zephyrian vessel as the battle reached its climax. High Admiral, your empire declared war on humanity believing that we were a primitive species that could be easily conquered. You were incorrect. We are the apex predator species of a Class 12 death world, and we have spent our entire evolutionary history learning to kill anything that threatens our survival. The final phase of the battle demonstrated the complete superiority of human tactical innovation over conventional galactic military doctrine. Human vessels coordinated attacks that seemed impossible to conventional military analysis, appearing simultaneously at multiple locations and delivering firepower that exceeded the theoretical output of their weapon systems. When the Battle of Terra ended 6 hours after it began, fewer than 200 Zephyrian vessels remained functional out of the original force of over 2,000. The survivors fled toward Imperial space carrying news of a defeat so comprehensive that it would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. High Admiral Zekthara was not among the survivors. The Universal Dominion had been destroyed in the final human assault, taking with it the Empire's most brilliant military mind and the last hope of conventional victory against the Death World species. In the aftermath of the battle, General Chen addressed not just the scattered remnants of the Zephyrian fleet, but the entire galaxy through communication networks that reached every inhabited system in known space. To all species of the Galactic Council and their associated civilizations, she began. Humanity has been attacked without provocation by forces that sought to conquer our worlds and enslave our people. We have demonstrated that such attacks will not be tolerated and cannot succeed. We have no desire for conquest or expansion beyond our current territories, but we will defend ourselves against any threat with complete determination. Her message continued with terms that would become the foundation of what historians would call the Terra Accords, the agreement that established humanity's place in galactic civilization and ensured that no species would ever again make the mistake of underestimating a Death World species. The Zephyrian Empire collapsed within months of the Battle of Terra, its military shattered and its confidence broken by the demonstration of human capabilities. Other species that had considered challenging galactic civilization rethought their strategies when they realized what had happened to an empire that had considered itself invincible. Humanity took their place in galactic civilization not as conquerors or as subjects, but as the species that every other civilization had learned to respect and fear in equal measure. They became the peacekeepers of the galaxy, the final arbiters of conflicts that threatened to destabilize interstellar relations. And throughout known space, in every language of every species, military academies taught the same lesson to new generations of officers. Remember Terra.
Never declare war on the deadliest species in the galaxy.
Some mistakes cannot be survived. The galaxy had learned the hard way that humanity earned their title as Death Worlders, and that some species should never ever be underestimated.